The waves struck the elevated railway structure nearby with such force that it partially derailed a train and crumbled a steel support column. Buildings were pulverized. The district's firehouse, Engine 31, a solid brick structure, was instantly swept 20 feet off its foundation and collapsed, trapping the firemen inside. Horses were instantly drowned in the viscous tsunami, and their cries were reportedly horrifying. Imagine a living creature suddenly plunged into a river of liquid asphalt. That was the experience of the men, women, and children caught in the molasses wave. The molasses, initially warmed in the tank, rapidly cooled in the winter air upon impact. This increase in viscosity, the measure of a liquid's resistance to flow, turned it into a deadly, fast-setting glue. Victims were not merely submerged, they were crushed, plastered to the ground, and instantly suffocated by the dense, heavy substance. One witness, said he saw a little girl suddenly lift up in dark coat-wrapped form momentarily suspended before she was slammed down and disappeared into the sticky morass. The resulting scene was one of Dantean horror. 2 square blocks of Boston's waterfront were utterly demolished, submerged beneath a thick, dark layer that was, in some places, 3 feet deep. The molasses poured into basements, sealing people inside their homes and workplaces. Emergency responders, including the first police officers and sailors from the USS Nantucket anchored nearby, arrived to find a chilling silence punctuated by the cries of the trapped and the rhythmic, sickening suck of the molasses pulling at the wreckage. The molasses had killed 21 people and injured 150 others. But the cleanup was a nightmare unto itself. Rescue was waded through hip-deep sludge, their movements agonizingly slow. The molasses was so heavy and so sticky that pulling victims free was an almost impossible task. Firefighters had to use saltwater hoses to attempt to melt and wash away the mess, a process that would take weeks. For days, the city's harbor was brown, and its streets were coated in a thick, sweet goo that tracked everywhere. Everything the molasses touched was ruined, and the sickly sweet smell lingered in the North End for decades, a constant, sickening reminder of the day Boston was drowned in a tsunami of sugar. The catastrophe was over in minutes, but its implications, physical, emotional, and legal, were only just beginning to unfold. The people of Boston looked at the site, looked at the U.S. Industrial Alcohol Company, and demanded to know who was responsible for the day the earth stood sticky. To continue the story, and it sounded like a low, rolling drum, then a high, tearing shriek. It smelled like Christmas morning, and it hit like a freight train. Boston, January 15, 1919. The day began with an unseasonable, almost absurd warmth. A strange, almost tropical breeze swept through the North End, coaxing the temperature up to a balmy 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 4.4 degrees Celsius, a perverse break from the usual New England bite. The Great War was over, and a restless, expectant energy thrummed in the city's heart. Children played in the cobbled streets of the predominantly Italian. Men clustered in the docks, and the aroma of baking bread mingled with the salty tang of the harbor. But dominating all other scents was a sweet, heavy, almost cloying perfume, the smell of molasses. This smell emanated from a colossal, hideous steel tank, a monument to greed and haste, owned by the Purity Distilling Company, a subsidiary of the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, USIA. The tank stood near the waterfront at 529 Commercial Street, a grotesque cylinder looming 50 feet high and 90 feet in diameter, packed with an unimaginable, terrifying volume of dark, viscous liquid. Inside that tank was over 2.3 million gallons of molasses. Molasses, the thick, sticky, dark byproduct of refining sugarcane into sugar, was not just a baking ingredient. In 1919, it was a crucial, high-demand commodity. It was fermented to produce industrial alcohol, which was essential for manufacturing munitions, specifically dynamite and smokeless powder, during the war. Even after the armistice, USIA continued to hoard and distill it, knowing the impending start of Prohibition in 1920 would send the demand for legal industrial alcohol soaring. But the Great Tank was a ticking bomb, literally and figuratively. At precisely 12:30 p.m., a sound that would haunt the survivors forever tore through the afternoon air. It began with a muffled thud, like the detonation of a colossal, distant cannon, immediately followed by a high, ripping shriek of metal tearing apart. The tank at 529 Commercial Street didn't just leak or crumble, it exploded. The force of the sudden rupture was astronomical. Witnesses miles away reported hearing the tremendous boom. The 2.3 million gallons of molasses, weighing approximately 26 million pounds, was instantly released. The fluid, made more volatile by the warm temperature that caused internal fermentation and the buildup of carbon dioxide, didn't simply spill, it launched. A terrifying 25-foot-high, 160-foot-wide wave of black molasses surged outward from the collapsed tank at an estimated speed of 35 miles per hour. This was not a gentle flowing tide, it was a dense, kinetic battering ram of sticky death. The lawsuit, the immediate filing of 125 separate lawsuits against USIA, consolidated into one massive case, which became one of the first major class action suits in U.S. history. Corporate defense. USIA's astonishing defense strategy, arguing that the tank rupture was not their negligence, but the result of anarchist bombing, a desperate attempt to capitalize on post-war Red Scare paranoia. The unprecedented hearing. The appointment of Colonel Hugh W. Ogden, a former Army officer, as a special master to hear the case, bypassing a traditional jury trial. This was a 7-year-long ordeal with over 3,000 pages of testimony. The science of failure. The critical role of expert witnesses, including the introduction of early forensic engineering to determine why the tank failed. Metal fatigue, stress fractures, and insufficient riveting.
They say your smart home listens. But last night, Emily learned it also talks back. Suddenly, her smart speaker lit up. No command, no wake word, just a soft whisper. Emily, don't look at the window.